Hey, today we're looking at what's gotta be the most underrated drum machine out there. I'm talking about the Korg drumlogue. Can it be as fat as an 808 kick? Can it match the aggression of a 909 snare? Let's compare and find out. This is Soundology. Please consider subscribing and join us on the hunt for inspiration. So I just got the drumlogue, and part of getting my bearings means replicating some of my favorite analog sounds. 808 kicks and claps, 909 kicks and snares. This helps me find sweet spots and better understand the creative boundaries of the device. In the case of the drumlogue, I was seriously impressed by its performance and surprised by some of its similarities to my MS-20. Check it out. Pretty similar, right? Honestly, since I got the drumlogue, I've been impressed by the sound quality, the look, and the workflow. It's been a very different experience than a lot of the mixed reviews here on YouTube. I'll make a full review of it once I've had it a little longer, but so far it feels like a future classic, especially at the current price point. For reference, I've had 11 or 12 different drum machines over the years, so this isn't my first rodeo, but I am really feeling optimistic because I just got this and it's awesome. I decided to try to replicate some of the patterns from Dr. Mix, which I'll link to below. He has some great videos that showcase the original 808 and 909 sound. I highly recommend you check them out. The 808 style clap sample on the drumlogue is in stereo, so that's not ideal for this purpose, but other than that, I'm pretty happy with this. So let's talk about the kick for a minute, and I'll show you what I did to get this far. The drumlogue kick design is clearly more influenced by the 909 than the 808. I mean, there's a drive knob, and the kick has a decent sweep range. That's the 909 style. And looking at Korg's heritage, like the MS-20, dirty is always going to fit in better than clean. So to take this 909 style kick and clean it up, I set the low pass filter really low. At 23%. And to avoid losing all the click, I maxed out the PCM transient, which is distorted click. So yeah, attack is 100%. That's the PCM transient. The mid-range body comes from the sweep or pitch envelope, which is set to as fast as possible. So 0% sweep time and about 50% sweep amount. I think this sounds really close, even though it uses a completely different circuit. And I didn't have to do much to get here. This kick does have some nice weight to it compared to an 808. I think it's also worth it to point out that even though there are only 3 kick parameters on the front panel, there are way more that you can change with these other 4 knobs here and the page buttons. What I want to highlight is the pitch envelope amount and rate. I've seen so many videos of the drumlogue where the pitch envelope is sluggish. And on most analog drum machines, you don't have control over something like that. But on this, you do have control over it. It's just not necessarily one of the performance controls. The snare isn't super strong in the mix. It's mostly clap. The sample I'm using is called Clap Wide, and it sounds like an 808 clap to me, but with a wide stereo image. But let's focus on the snare since it's analog and core to the sound of the drum machine. It sounds to me like the drumlogue snare is taking more influence from the 808 than the 909. It's a tunable pitch with an additional fifth that you can mix in. You also have noise, which we have a bunch of different options for, including the 808 noise. That's the snappy type. Easy. The whole thing is a sweet spot for 808 style snares. On the other hand, I've seen reviews of the drumlogue where people call the snare weak, and that's maybe an exaggeration, but it's absolutely a fair criticism. The amp envelope doesn't have as much smack as a 909 snare. There's no doubt about that. And I'll show you my workaround for that when we get to the 909 section. But I really don't think it's any weaker than the 808 snare. In fact, in some ways it's fatter because you can add a fifth. And then, of course, anyone who's spent more than a couple weeks working with drum machines knows to layer your snare with samples or claps if you really want it to sound massive. I mean, people even layer live drums with additional samples to fatten them up. So to me, an analog snare is a cool piece to add, even if the modern expectation is for it to be ultimately layered with a sample. It's a ratchet, quirky vibe, and I love it. All right, let's move on to the 909 demo. The kick is so easy on this one. Full sweep, 10% sweep time, and a little bit of PCM attack. If you play around with this, you can get cool kick tones all day. I didn't use any drive because it just didn't need it. The drumlogue is made for this kind of kick. The snare, on the other hand, took some massaging. I went back and forth, trying to figure out a way to make the snare as aggressive as Dr. Mix's 909. Maybe I need more snappy, maybe a different type of noise. It has 909 style noise. I tried high passing it, layering an octave above the fundamental drum tone, bit crushing the sample, but the attack is just not fast enough to nail it with the tools provided. The drumlogue snare does not want to be a 909, unless you use the onboard parallel compressor. Okay, so you have to use the scariest part of Darth Vader's drum machine. Compressors are made for shaping transient response, so I'll show you how to use this one to get more smack. I routed all the tracks to bypass the compressor, except for the snare drum. The threshold should be as low as it goes, and makeup gain should be maxed out at 8 dB. So the snare will be 8 dB louder than usual until the compressor kicks in, which is determined by the attack time. So this is going to be way too much transient emphasis as is, so I set it to only be 50% wet dry mixed in. To allow just a little transient through and squash the rest back to a normal volume, we'll use an attack time of 20 milliseconds. But this is not the most aggressive we can make this snare. Check it out. If I use 30 or 50 milliseconds, it gets even more aggressive. Let's check it out full wet. Yeah, it's way too much compression, setting the attack time longer. The release should be as fast as possible, so we don't get any weird compression carryover between the snare hits. So that's 50 milliseconds on this compressor. And the ratio should be 10 to maximize the amount that we emphasize the smack. So we'll bring up the level of the snare tail by turning down the wet-dry mix to 50%. And compare to dry. So with some compression, you can take our pretty chill 808 style snare and make it about as aggressive as a 909. It seems to me that vintage tones are a strong point of the drumlogue. I think it's also worth mentioning that I tried to get some massive modern techno kicks out of it, and it really just didn't hit the mark because the kick is not a sine wave. It doesn't want to be a sine wave. It's not. And that's the trade-off here. You can't have every vibe at once. Analog drums means opinionated. But I like the quirky sound, and I'm honored to use it to play this banana slug funeral. Thanks for watching. See you next time.